All right, we are live. Oh, well, it sent a tweet from David's account. That's cool.
Whoops.
He'll be fine. I forgot to turn that off. It'll be all right. All right, so retweet. Bang. All right, we are live. So anybody that wants to can be joining in right now. And I guess I'll just get this thing rolling. So what's up, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and founder/managing editor of ClutchCityControlRoom.com, your home for all things Houston hoops. You can follow me on Twitter at JT Gatlin, of course, the show at Locked On Rockets, and also the blog at Clutch City CR. Now, joining me, two very special guests here. We've got the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor, Ben DuBose.
What up?
And we've got native Houstonian Roosh Williams, the former microphone mastodon and the Houston sports fanalist. What's up, Roosh?
Not much, man. What's going on?
All right. Well, I'm really happy to have both of you here today. So without wasting any time, let's just dive straight into it. Rockets Thunder, first round. This is seriously the narratives behind this first round. I mean, just one of y'all go ahead and jump in. What was your immediate reaction as soon as it was finalized? Because things have been looking like this was going to be the first round series for a while now.
So I'll go first, man. I did not pay attention to the games yesterday. And then I didn't even know Miami was up big. I just saw that it was a down to the wire game. And then I saw Miami take the lead. And then I saw Muscala hit the three to win it, and my heart kind of sunk because I was just like, well, okay, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be Rockets.
Yeah, basically.
You know, and we had the news about Russ being hurt, and so I was just like, man, it's all lining up for a nightmare, as I predicted.
Mm-hmm. I've been anticipating that for weeks, honestly. You know, I would say really ever since, what game was it? It was when OKC lost to Denver. That close one when Chris Paul missed the free throw at the end. That was their chance to make a run at the division. I feel pretty confident that the Rockets wanted to be on the Lakers side of the bracket. And so when you look at the fact that OKC losing to Denver basically took them out of the division race for the 3 seed, and then the Rockets were going to be in 4-5 if they could help it because of the Lakers factor, then really all that was left was Oklahoma City and Utah. And OKC, they're just a better team, in my opinion, than the Jazz without Bogdanovich. So it just felt kind of like it was destiny, especially when you consider the storylines. And unfortunately, the Russ news definitely makes it even worse to sort of think about what could happen, because certainly Russ would want to play in this series. Hopefully he will eventually. But it just feels like, you know, again, just logically between OKC losing to Denver, Rockets wanting that 4-5, and then, you know, just the destiny. You have this blockbuster trade. All of the guys, James Harden, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, well, hopefully all the guys will be playing in the series. It's just one of those things that felt like it was inevitable to happen. Now we get to sort of settle the score on the floor.
Russ definitely missing, at least as quoted earlier from Jonathan Fagan, the source, missing a minimal amount of time from the series. Now, minimal to you guys, what does that mean? Because to me, I'm picturing, I don't know, half the series, like 2 to 3 games maybe? Are we thinking it's going to be worse than that, better than that? Like, where are we? Because to me, I think this is a series that absolutely Russ wants to play in. Right now, it's not going to be as emotionally charged as if it were a regular NBA season, and if there were going to be the fans and, you know, a return to Oklahoma City to play in a playoff crowd there for another team for the first time in his entire career. So it's not going to be as emotionally charged as that. But I still think there's a part of Russ that's going to want to get out there no matter what, even if it means potentially rushing back a little bit sooner than he should from this injury. What are you guys thinking?
So I've been looking at this from a couple of angles today. Clearly, the timetable, because it's not just the fact that the Rockets expect him, according to Jonathan Fagan, to be out for the start of the series. They said potentially longer. So I think there's a couple of things going on with that time frame. Number one, I think for whatever reason, they miscalculated on the front end of this process. You know, we learned in hindsight, he was injured either during or just before the Portland game, which is when he seemed to be a little bit limited. He didn't play, of course, against the Lakers and the Kings. So I think they sort of under-promised on the front end. As far as what happened, we'll never know. But my guess is that Russ, being the competitor that he is, it being almost the playoffs, tried to power through it, downplay it, and then the Rockets didn't know until they gave him this MRI within the last 24 to 36 hours, it sounds like. So that's what I think probably happened with regards to the timing. Now, as far as what they're saying, it's tough for me to think that after seeing an MRI, granted, everybody heals at a different pace, but it's tough for me to think that they don't have any sort of timetable in mind. And the good news is San Antonio game, that's the only game he's played in the last 9 days. So he has been sort of resting already. And so if we didn't re-aggravate it, which is what D'Antoni said, then it shouldn't be that much worse. So what I think is going on with the uncertainty in the timetable, I think in a perfect world, the Rockets would love to get through this series without using him because, as I said on Twitter today, I think the Rockets got Russell Westbrook for the high leverage matchups, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, the teams that they really just might not have the upside to beat otherwise. So I think in a perfect world, if they get up 2-0 on the Thunder, then they might hold him off until the next round to try and get him as close to 100% as possible. Whereas, if it's 1-1 or they're down 0-2, maybe he comes back earlier. So my hunch is that the uncertainty in the timetable is sort of related to that. I don't think it's a super serious strain or else, they would declare him out. My guess is that there's a little bit of gamesmanship that if they can buy more time, they would. They just might not be able to, depending on what happens the first couple of games on Tuesday and Thursday. So that's sort of my guess as to what's going on.
Look, on that note of super serious strain, just very quickly, because I know that Roosh has some thoughts as well, but they also didn't announce the Chris Paul strain, right? They didn't announce the severity of it right away. So I think that's something that's lingering in the back of everybody's mind is, how bad is this actual injury? How long will Russ be sidelined? So Roosh, what do you got for me?
Well, kind of to Ben's point about, the possibility of if there's gamesmanship or not. Someone commented saying, minimal means play and see if they win without him at all to try and extend his rest. Then if they lose, he comes back in game 3. I think that's the ideal scenario. I'm not saying that that's what I think is going to happen, but I just think that it's going to take, even if he comes back, first of all, minimal. If it was going to be just one game or less, not less, but just one game, I don't think they'd use the word minimal. I would think they'd use, language that would speak to maybe one game, maybe 2 games, but minimal is kind of vague, and I think it's intentionally vague. So that scares me, honestly. It makes me think that it's going to be at least half the series at best. And then even on top of that, let's say he does come back. My opinion from watching the games was that Russ didn't really look in shape. Not in shape. He didn't look good on the basketball court. He didn't look fluid. He didn't look in rhythm. And so to come back and find that rhythm in the middle of a playoff series while Eric Gordon is also trying to find his rhythm scares me, quite frankly. So we'll see. But on the other end of that spectrum, he looked pretty good athletically, physically against San Antonio. I had no indication that he was hurt. So I don't know if it's something that they're trying to play the long game with and that they're confident that they can take OKC on without him and survive so that they have him, in tip-top shape, ready to rock for round 2 and beyond. Or if it is something potentially serious and they're trying to babysit the scenario. So I don't know.
So to jump in on your point about how he looked, I agree generally with one exception. I thought especially in the second half of the Milwaukee game, he started to find himself. I think what happened, he wasn't on a court for 3 weeks almost in July because of COVID. And just as he finally started to get that rhythm back, we saw it during the Dallas game. And I thought especially Milwaukee, that's when he looked the most fluid. The scrimmages, I totally agree with you. He did not look right. Started the Dallas game. But you could see Dallas, and especially late in Milwaukee, he started to find it, and that's what makes the timing so unfortunate that, either the practice before or during early on in the Portland game, that this happened, because I do think that he was starting to find himself again after that layoff. So it's 2 different situations, just very frustrating. You, number one, had the COVID, and then you had what ended up happening with the quad situation in the Portland game. Now, to Jackson's point that I want to get to very quickly, one thing that makes me feel a lot better about this than the Chris Paul, yeah, you can say they were cagey with the Chris Paul thing. They didn't really have a choice because that was down to 2 games in 4 days, everything on the line. And unless you're going to rule them out for the series, which at that point is a huge tell to Golden State, there's not much else you could do. Other than the fact that, the injury diagnosis was that clear, I don't feel as bad just because, quite frankly, we have not seen it to the extent we saw with Chris Paul on the floor. When that happened to Chris Paul at the end of Game 5 against the Warriors, he could not stay in. The final minute of a close game, really, what was it? It was a 2-point game when that happened. and Quinn Cook got an open three that would have put the Warriors in front. If they win that game, they can close it out at home in Game 6. It was on the line. And Chris Paul is sitting in the backcourt. That's how much it was clear that it was a problem. He could not move. Whereas Russell Westbrook, he played on Tuesday. He played through it against Portland. After the game, he said he was fine. He talked to those of us in the media, said he was feeling okay. Apparently, according to D'Antoni, he woke up sore the next day. They did the MRI. To be completely fair, nobody really knows except for those that have seen the MRI. But just based on the context clues, I don't feel the same way about this than I did about Chris 2 years ago. Just because, with Chris, the context clues were there. He just could not move. With a playoff game, everything on the line. Whereas it never looked like that with Russ. So that's what gives me hope that this is not, a grade 2, which is what that was. Now, granted, that was a hamstring. This is a quad. But we're talking about the same thing, grade 1, grade 2. Hopefully this is a grade 1. And then I agree with Roosh. Definitely the language. It's probably not just game 1. I think at a minimum, you're looking at the first 2 games. Earliest would be Saturday game 3. Best case, realistic, probably be Monday game 4. But my guess is that some of the uncertainty is that if they could get through the first round without using him, they would love to do that. And then hopefully have him ready to go for the inevitable Lakers series.
And to your point, just to back up what you said, in the fourth quarter against the Bucks, he was 3 of 5 in 9 minutes. He had 11 points. 2 assists. He shot 6 free throws, 5 of 6, and he was a +4 overall. So,
yeah, and just that tail end of the Bucks game, right? Is he iced the 4 of 4 free throws because he missed the first pair that he had that quarter. He went 1 of 2, which I think he missed some other free throws along that way.
Earlier on.
Yeah, exactly. And then when it mattered most, down the stretch, he was doing what he needed to do. Now, also just for a quick refresher, right? So he did post 31 points that Dallas Mavericks game, then another 31 against Milwaukee, and then that Portland game is where he kind of struggled, 5 of 14 shooting from the floor, just 15 points. Not a great night. Didn't turn over the ball hardly at all. Just 1 turnover in that game, so that's a bit uncharacteristic of Russ. But just for some frame of reference on some of those games. Now, here's my thing is, as far as these games that we're looking at, kind of looking down the barrel at an OKC matchup without Russ, is obviously you immediately jump to the guys like Eric Gordon and Austin Rivers, who are both going to have, a large role in being the secondary ball handler, the secondary facilitator when James Harden sits down. This is going to feel a lot like 16-17 to me, where when James Harden sits down, all you have to do is try and survive the Hardenless minutes. And if you don't get absolutely decimated during those minutes where he's not on the court, then you're going to have a chance to win any of these games, which is why I don't worry so much about this series, because we've seen Harden be in this position without a, secondary superstar back during that 2016-2017 season.
So I would like to jump in real quick. I just want to address some comments. Rahat from Red 94 has said DeMar Carroll and Kyle Tucker in all caps.
Kyle Tucker, what up?
So thank you for that. Someone, Amir Omar, says that Westbrook has a great history of recovery from injuries as a freak athlete. That is true to some extent. His body has been great. You do have to survive the Carroll-less minutes. But anyway, so to that point, it's kind of like 16-17, but I went back and took a look, and any time that Harden has won in the playoffs with Houston, he's always had somebody else to step up that could create. In 2015, it was Josh Smith and Dwight Howard on occasion, but the Josh Smith-Dwight Howard connection was kind of like our secondary playmaking tool.
Did you know that they were AAU teammates?
Really?
Just got to make sure got to throw that one out there.
In 2017, believe it or not, a lot of people remember Lou Williams for stinking it up against the Spurs, but he had 18 points against the Thunder on 47% from the field, and he was 40% from 3. So Lou Williams won a lot of those games down the stretch. And then obviously 2018 and 19, we had Chris Paul. So who's it going to be this time? And we had Eric Gordon, of course, in 2017. But who's it going to be this time? And that's my big question. And I think it's got to be either one of 4 people, or it's got to be, we have to hope that we get these contributions by committee. So it's either going to be Jeff Green, as much as I hate to say that out loud, Danwell House.
Just lean into it, man. Just lean into it.
Yeah. Danwell House, Eric Gordon, or Austin Rivers. I think that's the batch of creators that the Rockets have after Russ. And it's going to be up to those guys to be able to create. We've seen Eric Gordon can go off for 50 literally on any given night. I think it's unrealistic to expect Gordon to play 7 of his 8 best games of the season. Sorry, those are my dogs. Within the context of like this series, right? Because he obviously had that 50-point game, which was by far his best game of the series, and then he's kind of stunk it up for the rest of the season. So is it Eric Gordon? Is it Austin Rivers, who we saw the other night can go off for 41? His dribble penetration, I think, is the second best on the team after Harden and Russ. He can break a defense down. The downside of Rivers is he usually doesn't look to pass, but when he does look to pass, he really, really, creates havoc. And when his shot is on, like, he can get it done. Daniel House has been playing well. We haven't seen him play recently because they've been resting him, but I thought he was playing well in the bubble. I thought he's been showing, signs and flashes of actually getting to the rim and being just more than a spot-up shooter. And then Jeff Green has been great. I just don't feel comfortable relying on Jeff Green. So I don't know. But I do think that this team is better defensively than 17. They have maybe less firepower with Lou Williams out and a weaker version of Eric Gordon. And honestly, without Russ, the loss of Capella hurts now because now you don't have like that easy bucket. And I think that's what the Rockets are going to miss the most that Russ gives them. And I think all successful basketball teams have this. They have a way to get an easy bucket at the rim, just, whether it's Giannis bullying you or LeBron bullying you or Russ bullying you or an easy alley-oop, whatever it is, there's always an easy, selection of baskets to get. Now the Rockets don't have that. So how do they make up for it?
Yeah, and to jump in, first off, the 2016-2017 parallel is interesting because, of course, that Rockets-Thunder first-round series was with the Thunder led by Russell Westbrook. So now you talk about it coming full circle. But as far as the guys you listed, first off, House, I agree, he's looked better. One good thing today, he's not on the injury report. And it's not they didn't issue one. Russell Westbrook is on it. So I think that's a good sign that House is feeling better as far as that toe that it was. With the Rockets, you always have to be careful with the injuries. Are they trying to mask it like what we talked about with Russ? With House not being on the injury report at all, I think they feel pretty good about that. So I think that's a good sign. I'm going to give a shout out to Christy, who, of course, is a good friend of mine. I've met her through Rockets Twitter things for a while now, and she's been in the comments section talking about Austin Rivers. I completely agree. I said the same thing on Twitter today. With Russ not available to play for at least the first couple of games, Rivers is the X factor. He is, when you get these 4-on-3 scenarios with Harden, Rivers is your best guy at attacking off the dribble and really just getting to the rim and trying to collapse the defense. Now, ideally, he can be a better passer than he's shown at times, but he absolutely has the ability to attack, to finish. He's inconsistent. I've talked about that on Twitter. The Rivers experience is something else. He has 41
very up and
games. Down. Yeah, and then there was a stretch within a minute yesterday. Did y'all notice he had a three that was off the side of the backboard, and then he airballed his next one. His airball was actually ended up a perfect pass. I forget who to. But, that's kind of the Austin Rivers experience. But part of it, his role, he's yanked around a little bit. And some of it, if he's not shooting well, then Tony has all these other guard options, so he won't necessarily play him. In my opinion, because of the skill set, you've got to ride Austin Rivers. And I said on Twitter, whatever makes him more comfortable. If he likes coming off the bench because that's what he's used to, do that. If he says that he feels better in the starting lineup, maybe even consider that because you have at least one vacancy that's not going to be your usual starting five. But whatever it takes to get Austin Rivers feeling good, we have seen him come through in the past for the Clippers when Chris Paul has had injury issues, one time with the hand. And another thing that I think back, this has been 5 years. You mentioned Josh Smith and Dwight Howard. The first 4 games of that series, remember when the Clippers went up 3-1 before the Rockets came back? Chris Paul missed 2 of those games. The latter 2, he was very limited coming off the hamstring. Austin Rivers scored 16 points a game, and he shot over 50% from the field and on threes. He played very, very well, stepping up for Chris Paul in that series. So he's done it before. Sample, I think, to me, I would put in House, maybe. I agree with Roosh. He showed signs in the bubble of being a little bit more than just a creator. But at least on paper, I think Rivers is the guy that gives you what you need, especially with those 4-on-3s to attack. And my emphasis going into this series against the Thunder, put him in whatever situations make him feel the most comfortable. If it's starting, if it's the bench, whatever units, whatever times, try and get Austin Rivers feeling good to where you get good Austin. Because if you get good Austin, then yeah, the Rockets still probably have the upper hand in the series, have the best player, James Harden. However, if you get bad Austin, then,
bad, if you
not having on top of it, it's a problem.
If you get bad Austin, bad things will happen. Now, in just a moment, I want to talk to you guys about some of the individual matchups that we're most looking forward to seeing in this series, kind of, guys going head to head. And, I want to get there. But first, let me drop in a quick word from our friends over at rockauto.com. So look, just with so many different makes and models of cars out there, it's basically impossible to stock all the parts that you need in a traditional chain storefront. You got to talk to the person behind the counter, and then they're just picking the parts that their store just so happens to carry. RockAuto.com, look, they're a family-owned business. They have every part imaginable that you could think of on their website. They've got everything from engine control modules to brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil. They've even got brand new carpet, believe it or not. So whether it's for your regular everyday driver or your special, your fun car, whatever it may be, you can check it out at rockauto.com. And here's the thing, all their prices, they're fair. They're the same for do-it-yourselfers and for professionals. So you're not going to get price gouged at rockauto.com. So check it out, go to rockauto.com and be sure to write Locked On in their little "How did you hear about us" box so that they know that we sent you there. They have an amazing selection. It's all reliably low prices, all the parts that your car will ever need from rockauto.com. Now, really quick, so these individual matchups, we've already spoken at length, it feels like now, about Austin Rivers and his importance. And obviously, offensively, there's going to be a need for a playmaker, for somebody between Rivers or Gordon to step up to be the secondary facilitator. But I honestly think that where some of this matchup, where the Rockets really need to hang their hat, is going to be defensively and stopping the three-headed dragon of guards from the Thunder with Chris Paul, Schroeder, and SGA. And I think Gordon and Rivers are going to be critical there. Now, as far as that goes, who do we see, like which individual matchups between kind of the guards are we looking most forward to seeing? Who do we picture is guarding who?
Well, so I don't think it's going to be, the Rockets switch everything, right? So I don't think it's going to be about individual matchups. So often when we look at basketball, when we talk about it, we think about, 1v1, this guy versus this guy, center versus center, yada, yada, yada. But the truth of the matter is, the Thunder mix things up. They're going to move off the ball. They're going to dribble, penetrate, causing us to rotate over, and then they're going to start dishing and doing all sorts of different stuff. So on one hand, in a weird way, I think losing Russ or not having Russ on the floor might result in stronger defense, better communication.
Yeah, I was going to make that point too, especially against the Thunder because they have all that off-ball action. Chris is so aware. I don't think it would hurt you that much against the Lakers in terms of Russ's sort of defensive lapses, but against the Thunder, I think you're exactly right because they have a little bit more motion, what they do off the ball, and of course Chris being as cerebral as he is. So I think you're right on the money there. Go back in. I just wanted to back that up a little bit.
Yeah, no, and so I think that'll help. I guess the phrase people use is it raises our floor. Losing Russ lowers the ceiling, but it raises the floor. And one thing if you've followed any of us on Twitter, you've obviously seen talk about DeMar Carroll. I think he might be important. I don't think he's going to play, but the blueprint, when the Rockets were down 20-0 against the Hornets way back in March, the blueprint that brought them back was 4 3-and-D guys surrounding Harden. And I think that this series is going to be 4 3-and-D guys surrounding Harden with occasional Mclemore obviously in there, because his shooting is valuable. But
dude, you pushing for DeMar Carroll minutes, I would have had no idea.
Who'd have thunk it? But basically, what I'm trying to say is it's going to take having versatile defenders, right? If you have guys like Mclemore, they're going to hunt him out with someone like Gallinari who's going to abuse him. Even someone like PJ, I think, is going to have difficulty guarding Gallinari because Gallinari's strong, Gallinari's tall, and he's got touch, right? Like Anthony Davis, for example, doesn't have the same touch that Danilo Gallinari does. And Danilo Gallinari can just kind of take his time, back you down, and then rise up and shoot over you. So eventually we might have to double. So I think the matchups will be all mixed up. My hope is that Robert Covington can guard Gallinari, that we have a good enough backcourt that's aware enough to switch. Harden's been playing really good defense lately, actually. He's been active. He's been closing out on shooters, switching correctly with purpose. So I think it's all there. It's just a matter of, in my opinion, can we stop Gallinari? And can we stop their dribble penetration when they do like that pseudo 3-man weave and they're moving off ball? So
yeah, a couple of things real quick. First off, I saw a comment from Alan's show in our chat. He made a great point when we were talking about the offense that Eric Gordon, even though he struggled from 3 yesterday, he actually looked pretty good on his drives, which tells you that his ankle, his knee, he looked fairly explosive. And I think based on that, he does need to shoot better on threes. Obviously, Roosh been on him for a damn good reason. But at the same time, the same athleticism that enabled him to drive to the basket, in theory, should allow him to be a pretty good defender. So I think potentially if Eric is healthy, then it's not only about the drives. Now he needs to clean up. His handle was a little loose, the turnovers that he had. Now some of that was just rust, I think, not having played really since March. But the root athleticism was there. I thought he looked pretty springy. And so I think that's a good side, not just offensively, but defensively as well, because certainly you're going to need him and Rivers against CP3, SGA, Schroeder. I agree. It's not about who guards who in the switching scheme, but you need guys that can stop dribble penetration because that's where they can slice and dice you. One other point I want to get to about Oklahoma City and the Rockets. One thing that I think is going to get blown way out of proportion on Rockets Twitter is the season
that's
series.
all you guys. Just as a heads up, that's everybody right now. We're calling you out.
Well,
yeah. So OKC did take 2 of 3 in the season series. That's true. Now, all of the 3 were before the switch to small ball, so there's limited value in that. However, beyond just the limited value, the small sample size, all those types of factors, what I would really remind people, that last Rockets Thunder game on MLK Day was really, really screwy. They lost final 6 minutes. The Rockets led by 15 points were under 7 minutes left in the game. The end of the game, they could not get anything to go their way. There was a stretch where they had lost 4 in a row, 5 of 6, their worst stretch of the entire season. Harden was dreadful. Harden shot 1 of 17 from 3. There were also 2 calls in the final 2 minutes, the last 2-minute report, that both were against the Rockets. There was a 4-point swing in which Harden got fouled. They didn't call it. The last 2-minute report confirmed that, yes, he was fouled. And it led to a transition run out, a layup at the other end that gave the Thunder the lead. So all of that was a really screwy game. I call it the Harden 1 for 17. That's probably not going to be replicated. The team as a whole, again, was in their worst funk of the year, 4 losses in a row, 5 of 6. And if you flip that result, then the Rockets win 2 of 3, and I don't think we're necessarily having the same, at least not the same extent of the discussion. So that's just my one kind of bit of cold water I would throw. I see a lot of people pointing out, the Thunder beat the Rockets 2 out of 3 this year. That's true. But number one, small sample, the small lineup had not happened yet. And then secondly, that last game was really, really screwy. If you flip that result, then it's 2-1 Rockets. And while, again, it's not conclusive, it's a tiny sample before small ball, yada, 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 all of it's true. I just think some people are making way too big of a deal out of that 2 out of 3.
Can I respond to that real quick?
Go for it, Roosh.
So on one, I just want to kind of sequentially address what you said. First, Eric Gordon, I agree. I thought he looked awful on the drive with the ball in his hand. I do think he looked good and like springy and spry off the ball. There were a couple times where he caught the ball while he was moving. Mm-hmm. His burst to the basket was definitely there. When he was trying to take his defender off the dribble, I don't think it looked good. I'm hoping that's rust because the way that we're going to utilize Eric Gordon, especially with Russell out, is on the ball and not, probably not as a slasher. So hopefully that takes care.
And just very quickly, I think the loose handle, that to me speaks more to rust. I'd be a lot worried if it was the other thing. So you're right, he did not look good off the dribble, all the turnovers. But yeah, I think the loose handle speaks more to the rust factor. So I think there's some optimism that with a few more games, maybe not one, although we'll see what tomorrow finale, that'll be good for Gordon. But I do think the loose handle can be corrected in time. The 3-point shot, we'll see. Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, we'll see. And then to the point of that game that you're speaking of. So on one hand, yeah, you're right. Harden played terribly. We had the game wrapped up. We blew it. On the other hand, we blew it, right? And that's kind of who OKC is. They never go away, especially Ben.
That's
this.
True.
Chris Paul never has any interest in losing any game. So now that is against us instead of for us. So they're never out of it. And what I'm worried about is basketball is a game of runs, especially in the playoffs. And what Russell brings to the Rockets and to any team he's really ever been on is he's full of gas for 4 quarters. There have been many times where Russell has closed the game for us, not necessarily by being an ISO king, but just with his hustle and with his ability to get up and down the floor in a flash. He's brought like an intensity at the end of games that sometimes has been lacking from Harden. And so now, the narratives about Harden are all going to be there. We're relying on James Harden, and we're relying on the shooters that he's going to give the ball to. We don't have Chris Paul. We don't have Russell Westbrook, who's going to be able to mask, if Harden goes cold, if Harden gets disinterested for any reason, which I think was previously a product of the environment and crowds. So he doesn't look like that disinterested version of Harden because this is kind of just strictly hooping. So I'm hoping that plays into his favor and we see like a different animal. But he does have that tendency sometimes to kind of slack off. And so what I'm worried about is, we might get up and get a big run, and then OKC might come right back and we don't have Russell to deliver the last blow, or vice versa, like what happened with the Kings. We might go down big early, and then we might expend all of our energy coming back, and then we don't have enough to land the last blow. And third, I want to point this out because I see a lot of people on Rockets Twitter saying, Adams is going to get played off the court. they need to keep in mind it works both ways, right? We're relying on a bunch of pretty streaky shooters. This is our game plan. It's James Harden and some streaky shooters, and hopefully they hit, right? Austin Rivers, Jeff Green, Eric Gordon, Covington, who's been in a funk. So if the shots are off, Steven Adams is completely playable. And on the flip side of that, he's going to do damage on the other end of the court because he's extremely strong. We'll probably have PJ Tucker guarding him. And as great as PJ is, I mean, Adams is just bigger and stronger. He's a very strong defender. He knows how to position himself. He has underrated touch within 5 to 7 feet of the basket. He's not great or anything like that, but he can really hurt a team that, doesn't have someone big enough to guard him. So I think we need to kind of consider all those factors because it could go this way or that way.
And to your point on the runs, now, first off, I don't really take that much of the January game, what happened late, because the Rockets at that point were in a terrible spot. That was a weekend when they were getting beat by double digits by Memphis and Portland. They were not playing well at all. With that said, you're exactly right about the Thunder. They've done this to teams all season long, late in the game. They are never out of it. So you're exactly right on that. In my opinion, as far as the late game execution, I think the biggest variable, you've got to have James Harden committed to pushing the pace. Because if it bogs down into a half court, number one, it makes it easier for them to keep Steven Adams out there. And then it also makes it easier, if Harden settles for these. And we've seen it not as much the last two postseasons, but certainly like the San Antonio series, late 2017, late in these close playoff games, Harden just sort of settling for the hero shot and taking all the time off the clock. Without Russell Westbrook, that's where if Harden does that, then if they commit a second guy, even a fraction to Harden, then Westbrook can slash to the bucket. The same way we saw him do late in the Milwaukee game when it was Westbrook, not Harden, that was closing it out. So to me in this series, how do you do it without Russell Westbrook, and how do you also potentially play Steven Adams off the floor? You've got to play at a higher pace, get some easier buckets, and make sure that Austin Rivers and Eric Gordon get some touches. We've talked about both of them already on this show, but to me, that's how you diversify, because the real danger, yes, if the Rockets do not diversify beyond Harden, he holds the ball, it's slow, it gets in a half court, which allows Adams to stay out there, they can commit extra resources, and, as Roosh mentioned, the shooting has been inconsistent for the Rockets. That's how you can get sticky, and even if the Rockets lead for most of the game, you can go through a dry spell late, and the Thunder can take advantage and close on a run and steal a game the way they've done for most of this season. So I think it's going to be very important for Harden. In the past, he's had a tendency to slow the game a bit too much. At this point, with no big man on the Rockets, remember, this system is optimized, well, certainly towards Russ, but also towards the idea of playing with pace. I think it's going to be extra important. Play with pace so that you get your other playmakers, Austin Rivers, Eric Gordon, Daniel House, whoever it is, some buckets so that Oklahoma City has to respect the entire floor. To me, that's the key. And if you do that, then you can avoid getting predictable, getting sticky. Because, if you do get predictable, you get sticky, you bog down, then Roosh is right. That's exactly what can cost you a game that you otherwise would win.
Some numbers to back up that point really quick that our boy Disney Gary Clark, Itamar, threw on Twitter earlier. The Rockets actually had a 105.5 pace in the bubble during the Harden-only minutes, and the Thunder have a 100.7 pace overall with 100.3 with Paul on the court. So they are playing at a faster pace than the Thunder, but I do think, to kind of back up that point is just without Russ, they are more inclined to play slowly. That's just something that we've seen. Harden is, at times more willing to slow things down, just get into the ISO game. And my biggest concern there is not only are so many of their shooters in a funk right now, PJ Tucker, Robert Covington, Ben Mclemore has been in a funk lately. Austin Rivers is hot and cold. Not only that, but, and this is something that I've harped on all season, is when they get into a funk, when they stop hitting their shots, they get hesitant. And nothing kills the Rockets offense more than passing up decent looks from three just because your shot's not going in. Watching PJ Tucker kick the ball out of the corner when he had a wide open three, or watching Robert Covington hesitate on the wing when he has a wide open look just because they haven't been hitting their shots, is what bogs down this offense. And then we see it time and time again where that happens. It gets kicked back out to James Harden, and then he's stuck out there on the perimeter with 8 seconds left on the shot clock and is forced into a rushed step back three-pointer. So I want to know just I wonder which lineup is going to be the lineup that finds the most success in this one, because I think usually it's really easy when everybody's healthy to point to, the starting lineup is more than likely the closing lineup. And that's been the case for much of the season. But then with the return of Eric Gordon, does he become a closer? Is he the guy that Mike D'Antoni trusts, at the end of a game? Is Austin Rivers potentially going to be on the court at the end of the game, depending on how his playmaking goes? What do you guys think that go-to end-of-game lineup is going to look like?
So what I'm interested in, and I'll toss this to Roosh because I know he's not the world's biggest Jeff Green fan, but I agree. We had a comment a minute ago that Jeff Green is especially important as a release valve for Harden, another creator. If PJ Tucker is cold, now you're not going to pull PJ Tucker. I agree with that, but would you look at it potentially a lineup where you go bigger and you have both Green and PJ out there along with perhaps Robert Covington? Would you have a lot of bigs to get Jeff Green on the floor, given his abilities as a pseudo creator, a passer? I don't think you're going to take either Tucker or Covington off the floor when the game's being decided just because they're so important to you defensively. Maybe if one of them is ice cold, you consider it. But I do think that there might be a temptation. We spent a lot of the podcast talking about Rivers and Gordon and House, the backcourt guys that can step up, or perimeter guys, I should say, in the absence of Westbrook. Do you see a scenario, Roosh, where you might think about closing or coming close to closing with Jeff Green? Because I could see his creativity. Somebody mentioned in that 2016-2017 parallel, Nene was so crucial against Oklahoma City. Jeff Green, he's not the traditional big that Nene is, but in terms of being able to create his own offense, you can see some overlap there. What's your thought about Jeff going into this series?
Yeah, I mean, look, before you said anything, that's exactly where I was going to go, because Jeff Green, quite frankly, you can make a very strong argument that Jeff Green is the second best playmaker with the ball in his hands after James Harden and Russell Westbrook. Well, third best, but with Westbrook out, he's the second best guy on the ball that can create for others. So yeah, and I was going to say, I think a lot of the series is going to come down to Jeff Green and PJ Tucker hitting corner threes, because that's how they're going to keep Adams on the floor. He's going to help over, kind of like how Brook Lopez does, and they're just going to dare us to shoot those threes. And if they're off, then they're off. But if they hit, things change. I do think closing the game or closing games with Jeff Green might be the way to go. I don't think that Oklahoma City is going to double a lot, just based on what I've seen their fan base say. I've seen their fan base say Donovan doesn't like to double. I haven't run the games back yet. I haven't had a chance to, the ones against Oklahoma City. And also, doubling Harden pretty much happens because Russell can't shoot, and that's what teams dare you to do. So without Russell, I think teams are just going to man us up for the most part. And so, yeah, honestly, a lineup I like a lot. And I always talk about that Hornets game when they were down 20-0, but it kind of opened my eyes.
If you put DeMar Carroll in this lineup, I swear.
I'm about to. So you're going to need, an alternative to going small. We can do the thing where we go PJ and Mclemore, and if the threes are hitting and if they're scrambling on defense, things are working out. But
like the Toronto game.
Right, but you have to be versatile, especially against a team like Oklahoma City, because they have a balanced attack. I've said this on Twitter. They have three guys that score 19 a game. Then they have Chris Paul at 18 a game. They have, I think, 6 or 7 guys that can shoot 35% or above from three that are reasonably in their rotation. So they don't jump out on paper like, oh my God, LeBron, Kawhi, Paul George, but they're very balanced and they're very stable across the board. So if we go, strong in one direction, being offense, that could backfire. So you have to have contingency plans to be able to kind of go the opposite. So what I'm saying is you get a lineup of Jeff Green, Robert Covington, DeMar Carroll, Harden, and then either Gordon or Austin Rivers for, guard to guard the guards, basically.
Of course, you got to get DeMar Carroll out there.
I knew it. I knew it was coming.
I'm telling you.
If you're in the chat, say something. Wink at us.
Right? He's there. He's hidden.
What else are they doing at the bubble? Come on.
This is the reason, though, because you need, if we have length, look, small ball will work if we got a bunch of 6'7" dudes. So if you got DeMar Carroll, Jeff Green, Robert Covington, now you have 3 guys with length that can switch, that also have strength and pretty good defensive instincts. Jeff Green on the lower end of that spectrum, but he's defended well for the most part in Houston. So I think that's one of the ways that you have to go. You have to be able to, you need guys, look, let me just be clear while we're here. I don't think DeMar Carroll is going to go score 15 points and have awesome games. I think he's going to have games where he has 4 points.
He's backpedaling now, guys. 4
points, 1 of 3 from 3, 2 steals, 3 assists, but he does scrappy, hustle play things. He deflects balls. He gets offensive rebounds. He tips passes.
He makes winning basketball plays. He's very similar to PJ Tucker in that regard, that a lot of what they do will never show up on a stat sheet, and you'll look at their box score at the end of the night and you think, okay, this guy had a very so-so game, ones and twos everywhere across the stat sheet, but he makes winning basketball plays, just like PJ Tucker does.
Exactly, and that's exactly what PJ Tucker does. I mean, PJ Tucker is shooting, I think, 20-something% from three in the bubble, but he's out there. Why? Because he plays incredible defense and he hustles and he knows the scheme. Like, DeMarre Carroll's not as good of a defender as him, but he's pretty damn good. Now, back to Jeff Green. I don't think Oklahoma City is going to double, but we've seen a lot of plays or a lot of action where Jeff Green gets the ball at the top of the key and we run screens kind of around him. And then you force the defense to shift, and sometimes they'll go with the cutter and they leave a lane wide open for Jeff Green. And even when they don't, when he's manned up, he's been very long and like kind of finishing around at the rim, and he's also been kicking to the corner. So as much as I hate to say that we have to rely on Jeff Green, I'm with Ben. I think that a lot of the Rockets' success can come from Jeff Green as a secondary playmaker on the ball.
Mm-hmm. Now, hang on, really quick, Ben. I want to kind of have a counterpoint to that, because I actually feel almost the exact opposite, in the sense that I think we're legitimately going to see a lot of stretches where Harden, Gordon, and Rivers are actually sharing the court at the same time. Like, legitimately. I'm making that claim right now.
Well, during the game, yes. I was just talking about the closing lineup. During the game, yeah.
Okay, because but even as a potential closing lineup, I'm putting it out there. I think we're going to see that alongside Robert Covington and PJ Tucker. I think that even if Jeff Green, because I think the argument there is, as your secondary, facilitator, playmaker, Jeff Green becomes, can be a safety valve offensively. But if you have, Gordon and Rivers out there as well, then there's not really an excuse for Harden. If Harden does get trapped, you have two other, ideally ball handlers who can then, penetrate, attack the 4-on-3 if they're doubling, things of that nature. So I think that is a lineup that we might see as a potential closing lineup, and definitely we're going to see it throughout the game, those three guards staggered on the court at the same time.
So also, in terms of deciding...
Real quick, I just want to say, someone in the comments says DeMarre Carroll comes from the school.
I see that.
Program, so show him some love.
I see, buddy.
You know who else comes from there is MPJ, who what was his Snapchat fiasco? Are we going to talk about this? Okay, no, we won't. No,
let's not go there.
And real quick, while we're on Missouri, I was looking into the old Denver Nuggets that won 50 games and had the 8 seed, and I just wanted to throw out Linus Kleiza, if you remember that guy, Ben.
Oh yeah, yep. I remember that was when I first started getting into Mizzou, once I knew that I was going to go there. But so one thing I want to get back to, as far as the lineups, it's not just who plays, but it's deciding their usage, how they're deployed, at what points. I've been through today cycles in which I woke up more optimistic. We talked about this last night, Roosh, so a lot of Rockets Twitter, assuming that Russ was going to be able to play. And then once you got the Russ news, it's a gut punch, because let's be real, these teams have the same record for a reason, and now you're losing a guy who was a contributor to the Rockets' record, and the Thunder have most of their guys that have contributed, and they've actually been the third best team in the NBA since Thanksgiving. And yeah, it's pretty scary. So there's reason for that. However, one way that I've sort of talked myself off the ledge, there's been a few things. First off, I do think Austin Rivers can potentially step up. I also think Roosh has a point about Westbrook defensively might be a little bit more of a liability than we had thought against Oklahoma City. I think there's something to that. And then the other thing that's kind of brought me back, to start the day, I was thinking that the Rockets just had a talent advantage. I know it wasn't third of the record, but I just said, look, the Rockets are the better team. Once they're focused, they'll figure it out. Okay, closer to parity now. Even aside from the fact the Rockets do have the best player, James Harden, this is not a talent match anymore. These teams definitely belong on the same court together. It's just going to come down to execution. Now, the Thunder do have a really smart point guard in Chris Paul, but where I really think the Rockets could have an edge in this series, especially if it's close, Mike D'Antoni versus Billy Donovan. I think 2016, 2017, I thought D'Antoni outcoached him in that 5-game series. I thought Donovan took a lot of deserved criticism the last couple of years. Thunder against the Jazz 2 years ago, and Quinn Snyder, certainly against the Blazers and Terry Stotts last year. I bet Donovan as a coach, the matchups. Not saying D'Antoni is perfect. I know, Roosh, you're not exactly the biggest fan of MDA, but I do trust him in a playoff environment more than I do Billy Donovan. And so, again, the Donovan factor is mitigated somewhat by Chris Paul, who is as much of a coach on the floor as you will ever have. But in terms of developing the lineups, the feel for the game itself, I know the rotation issues, all of that is true, the depth. all of that is completely fair. But in terms of one-on-one, in-game coaching, deploying the right matchups, gun to my head, I trust Mike D'Antoni more than I do Billy Donovan. And in a close series, that could end up mattering.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's valid. Billy Donovan has not really performed for the Thunder in the playoffs. I think a lot of Thunder fans are frustrated with him. I do think it's mitigated with Chris Paul, though, and that's kind of what scares me. Is Chris Paul has intel on his team. I think he has intel, obviously, on Harden. If there's anyone that's going to know what gets to Harden or how to break Harden down, I think it's got to be Chris Paul. On the flip side of that, I think Harden is an elite competitor, and I think he's going to be, extra driven and motivated by the fact that he is facing Chris Paul. So hopefully we don't see that mentality where he kind of flames out or gets tired. I do fear that we're going to have to lean so heavily on Harden that even if the Rockets pull it out, he's going to be gassed by round 2. That is one thing that I'm kind of worried about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, like I said, we're going James Harden with 4 role players, several journeymen, honestly, against a team that people I think are underrating. OKC's good, man. A lot of Rockets fans are kind of laughing it off like, yeah, right, we'll beat them. But to Ben's point, we have the same record, and Russell Westbrook played for most of the season, and now Russell Westbrook's gone.
I think there's a silver lining though to the idea that say you make it past OKC, say Russ only plays a handful of games, or maybe he doesn't even play the series at all. Worst case scenario, right? He's sitting out the entire series. I think if you make it to an eventual matchup with the Lakers, I think in that matchup, I think Russ is your X factor against that team. I think that, he, like Ben mentioned earlier, you got Russ to deal with the upper echelon type matchups, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, to have that higher ceiling. And, looking back at the matchups, from earlier this season, thinking back to the very first official game of small ball where Russ dropped, it was 40-something points, 30-something. He had a really monster game against the Lakers, and it looked like they really largely didn't have an answer for him. And now without Avery Bradley, without Rajon Rondo, without the added guard depth to try and keep up with Russ, I picture him as being the difference maker in that series. So even if Harden's gassed come that series, I think if you get Russ back, if he winds up resting, sitting out that entire series, or sitting out the entire first round, then you have him locked and loaded, ready to go in that second round. Now, in just a moment, I want to keep this conversation rolling with you guys. But first, I want to drop in a quick word from our friends over at Built Bars. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I used to not be a fan of protein bars. I used to think they tasted pretty gross, honestly. A lot of times they're, grimy, gritty, chewy, too chewy, whatever. And I have never felt that way with Built Bars. I got my first sample pack a couple months ago, and I haven't been working out as much as I need to. But they've got a bunch of different amazing flavors. They're coming out with some new flavors too. My favorite, which I've talked about on this very podcast before, is the double chocolate mousse. Can't go wrong with it. I'm just a chocolate kind of guy all the way. But they're coming out with a bunch of new flavors: caramel brownie, cookies and cream, lemon almond cheesecake, carrot cake, and apple almond crisp. So a bunch of great new flavors. Look, they're great for the health conscious person if you're trying to lose weight or even maintain weight, or trying to add bulk, whatever you're trying to do. Look, you can do that with Built Bars. And right now at Locked On, we're doing a special offer where if you use the code Locked On at BuiltBar.com, you actually get $10 off your order. They just revamped their entire warehouse. They're coming out with these new flavors. So be sure to check it out at BuiltBar.com and use promo code Locked On for $10 off at checkout. So as we're kind of wrapping this up, because we're getting close to 9 o'clock now.
Can I just say one thing, though?
Go for it. Is it about Built Bars? You help me out here?
Protein, no. So I was going to say, as evenly, I don't want to say they're evenly matched, because I'm not even sure if the teams are evenly matched necessarily, or if it's just a good matchup. But it's going to come down also to just little things, right? Chris Paul, people are talking in the comments and reminding me that Chris Paul hurt his offhand thumb, I think. I think he jammed his thumb.
Left-handed thumb, yeah.
And so, little things like that could make a difference. Also, one thing that actually worries me is most of these games are in the day. Most of the first 4 games, they're day games, and the Rockets don't really play well early in the day. Maybe that's just my eye test remembering. I haven't looked up the numbers, but it seems like every time the Rockets have a game at noon or 1 p.m. on a Sunday on ABC, they lose it. I don't know if Harden just hoops at night better or what, but I think little things like that are also kind of going to play into it. And so
he gets a stat buff at night.
So, yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
No, for sure. No, and that's a great point. I think remembering like right when the schedule dropped, I think the earliest tip off as far as Central Time goes is what 5:30 p.m. I think. I don't think there's a later tip off.
5:30 is the earliest. It's game one, and then you have a couple of like 2 and 3 o'clock in there, a 5 o'clock. For those asking why, there's only 2 courts that are approved for playoff use. And they've got to get in, at least while every series is going on, they've got to get in multiple games per day. And of course, because it's the playoffs, they got to make sure that there's sufficient time in between to clean up, make sure everything is suitable. So one game's got to start early. And honestly, Houston, Oklahoma City, especially the Thunder factor, it's a pretty small market. I think the smallest in the NBA in terms of media. So it's not massive ratings. Russell Westbrook, at least at the beginning of the series, probably isn't going to be out there. So I think that's why the Rockets Thunder gets the short end of the stick. But yeah, because of that, you got to get into multiple games a day per arena. Then yeah, you're going to have some early start times. I think it's good that the Rockets got a couple out of the way this week. They didn't win either of them. Now, of course, Westbrook didn't play the second one along with House. You didn't have Harden first one, and there was no incentive for the Rockets to win in either of those games anyway. They got what they wanted in the 4-5. But I do think it's something that, again, it takes some getting used to. And if nothing else, at least they're going to have a consistency. I think it'd be a lot better. It's a lot better this way than it would be if they went from
7 p.m. to 2 p.m.
to 2 p.m. for an impactful game 2 or game 3. So it sucks, at least for fans, I think. But I think the players will get used to it pretty quickly.
It'll definitely clean up come the second round, too, because once there's less teams competing and you have more, open time slots for the gyms, then we'll get back to having some decent, start times instead of the 5:30.
Yeah. By the way, I'm laughing at someone in the comments who says it's because Harden doesn't get home from the strip club until 7 a.m.
Oh, man. That's why he gets a stat buff at night. There we go.
I was going to point out, actually, to correct myself, or maybe I'm an idiot. Is Florida on East Coast time?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're in Orlando. So
so it is a little bit later. Like, for example, the first game is 6:30 out there.
I've already started automatically. Every single time I see an Eastern time slot now, because everything's in Orlando, I've just started deducting an hour immediately. But we've done our fair share of talking about, the Rockets and things that they have to do and, things that they have to accomplish to make this series work, especially in the absence of Russell Westbrook, at least for the time being. But I want to know really quickly and I feel like maybe I should say besides Chris Paul, but I won't put that disclaimer on it. Which Thunder player worries you the most? Like, who, looking down this Thunder roster, I know that we've talked about they have a balanced approach to scoring. They've got the 4 guys that are all averaging close to 19 points a game, and they kind of spread out their scoring across those 4 guys. But which player legitimately worries you the most? Because for me, we've already talked about it though. I'm worried about going up against Chris Paul in a grueling potential 6-7 game series. I'm worried about dealing with Chris Paul. I've already harped on this, talking about the fact that think about all the little winning things that Chris Paul does in basketball games. The rip throughs when you're in the bonus, sneaking behind a big and ripping the ball away from him when he's not paying attention and then taking off to the other end for an easy 2. Just all these little things that Chris Paul did for 2 years here in Houston. And now he's going to be doing it against you in a playoff series. I'm not looking forward to it. Like, legitimately, I am going to be distraught at points watching him do these things to the Houston Rockets.
I'm going to say that I'm worried about Gallinari. A couple of people mentioned him in the chat, and this is the type of big, whether he's at the 4, whether he's at the 5, but someone that has a lot of height that can match up with what the Rockets like to do. One thing that I did not like against the Spurs and the Pacers, they gave up a lot of open corner threes. The communication was not great. Now, I think some of it was the fact that the games had no meaning to the Rockets. There was no real incentive, but if you're giving up those types of open looks, your communication isn't there. And unlike a lot of teams, they've got a big that can actually space the floor and is a reliable shooter, can do a little bit of creating as well. That's tough. I mean, I think the Rockets, in theory, Robert Covington, PJ Tucker, they have the bigs in the front line that can contest, obviously, all the way out to the 3-point line. Now, as Roosh says with the Rockets, he's right. Everything is about switching anyway. But Gallinari concerns me. That's the kind of big that can make the Thunder a little more flexible than you might think. I do hope that the Rockets, to some degree, can play Steven Adams off the floor. Not entirely. It won't be an Enes Kanter, can't play Adams the way you can't play Kanter, the infamous clip from Billy Donovan. But I do think that Gallinari gives them some flexibility that a lot of teams in the West might not have, and that's something that they're going to have to account for, and I hope the defensive communication is always there.
Yeah, That was my answer as well. And to add on to everything you said, which I agree with, he's the only player that they have that commands a double team, that can command a double team. He has the ability to post up. Again, if you go back and he averaged in the 2 wins the Thunder had against Houston, he averaged 24 points and 12 rebounds on 50% from three, 7 of 14 from three, I think. And like I said, I didn't go back and watch those games yet, but I remember from memory that he was just backing I think PJ down and just shooting over him. And there was really nothing we could do. Now, we didn't have Covington in those games, so the hope is that Covington has enough strength and enough length to not just kind of get back down and shot over. And, last shameless plug, DeMar Carroll has the body type and the strength.
Of course.
I'm telling you, you don't have to believe me, but you can get 5 solid minutes of just defense. Or even maybe Jeff Green. I think Jeff Green is strong enough, and Gallinari is not, he's not fast enough on his feet to beat Jeff Green off the dribble, I don't think. So hopefully those 2 acquisitions or those 3 acquisitions are exactly the type of player and body type that we can use to guard Gallinari. But yeah, he can command a double team. And if he does command a double team, then it's going to screw the Rockets up, because when the Rockets have to double with the lack of size, it becomes difficult. I think the Rockets are at their best when it's basically 5-on-5, just a bunch of one-on-one matchups across the board. So anything that kind of scrambles that up is problematic. And then I don't think we've talked about him enough, but Dennis Schroeder. Dennis Schroeder is a rocket killer.
Yeah.
He's always been a rocket killer, even in Atlanta. It's just one of those weird things where Dennis Schroeder goes off, and so who's going to guard Dennis Schroeder? I think Rivers has good perimeter defense and the quicks to guard him, but like we've said, it's not necessarily going to be just a one-on-one thing. So are they going to hunt him out? And I think that one thing we didn't really touch on is without Russ. So look, when the Rockets had Harden and Russ on the floor at the same time, you have 2 potential defensive liabilities, at least in terms of awareness and just kind of falling asleep. Now Russ is gone. The other person that fits that bill defensively on the Rockets is Ben Mclemore. Ben Mclemore kind of falls asleep on defense. He's not really a threat defensively when he gets taken to the hole. Even when he moves his feet correctly, I've seen him get bodied off a lot, and no one really has difficulty scoring on him when they drive to the basket. And I've seen a lot of clips when I go back and watch old games where he just gets put in the pick and roll, and they take complete advantage of the Rockets switching everything on the pick and roll, and McLemore is usually a part of that. So I anticipate Chris Paul knows that, and he's going to do, what he can to exploit that. So, yeah, Dennis Schroeder, Gallinari, I think those are going to be the X factors. And then I think Lou Dort is going to be a pain in the ass.
If he's healthy.
If he's healthy, he's definitely missing game 1, correct? I think that was the most recent.
No, he's definitely missing the finale, but a sprained knee does not sound great.
Is that officially sprained knee?
Sprained knee. He's out for the finale. They haven't given any timetable beyond that.
Okay, that could actually be very big for Houston. He's one of those guys. He's much like a DeMar Carroll. He's just a nobody, but he hustles. He can play defense. I'm telling you. I hope we get some DC. But I'm telling you, look, we always talk about how games are won at the margins, right? Lou Dort is a margin guy. DeMar Carroll is a margin guy. But if Lou Dort is not healthy, he's going to be one of those guys, a scrappy guy that is just going to chase Harden down wherever he goes, waste some fouls, whatever, get in Harden's grill. Kind of like a Josh Okogie, kind of like Pat Bev, just one of those scrappy guys that bothers James Harden. So if he's out, I think that's huge. So we'll see.
You mentioned both of you kind of sided with the, talking about Gallinari, and it does make a lot of sense because there's one thing that, and I only just recently learned this term the other day, thanks to, shout out to Ali Kambijani, who is constantly educating everybody on Rockets Twitter about the X's and O's of basketball. One area that they are going to have to be really good at is what it's quote unquote the scram switches, where, anybody who's watched the games, you get used to it, where as soon as there's a, pick and roll or a switch that happens where you've got a guard or a smaller player on one of the bigs, the Rockets do that scram switch where one of the forwards, whoever's guarding the opposing corner, they switch really quickly and they call it out to where you'll have PJ Tucker guarding the opposing corner and then maybe Austin Rivers gets switched on to Gallinari. And then if they do the scram switch properly, then PJ and Rivers will switch to where Rivers is then on the guy in the corner and then PJ is the one on Gallinari. So that's going to be, it is imperative that they are on top of that and the communication defensively to not let Gallinari take advantage of them using his size down low, abusing the smaller players, especially, guys like Mclemore, who, his communication, his defensive awareness at times might be a little askew. Trying trying to put it nice, trying to put it kindly. But I've also petitioned for so long now that Ben Mclemore belongs in the Gerald Green role, and you plug him in, give him 5, maybe 10 minutes off the bench, and run some set plays for him when he comes in the game. That's the part that bothers me. Is I don't understand why, when he does check into the game, why they're not immediately running set plays for him every single time down the court. Because having Ben Mclemore in the game, and I remember it was what was it? Maybe the Kings game where he checked in and in 12 minutes of burn had like 1 shot attempt or no shot attempts or something like that. And I remember highlighting it saying there's no reason for him to play if he's not getting 3-point shots up, because then you're just exposing yourself defensively. But as you mentioned, Roosh, it does make a lot of sense that now that there's not going to be Russ and Harden, 2 potential defensive liabilities, which, credit to Harden, he's been a lot better in the bubble as of late. He's been a lot more honed in. He's looked like, don't at me, best 2-way player in the bubble. Not seriously, but he's been a lot more locked in defensively in the bubble, and that's been encouraging. That's been a great sign. So without Russ out there, you might be able to justify having Mclemore and Harden share the court a bit more, because like you said, you're not going to have, at that point, you wouldn't have 3 defensive liabilities. You just have the 2. So I do think that's that's an interesting thing. And we'll, seeing how many minutes he actually gets, seeing if DeMarre Carroll gets any minutes, any actual run in the series is going to be interesting. Now, before we wrap things up, guys, final thoughts, anything you want to throw in here before we close things out?
Yeah, I want to ask, so with Westbrook out, are we going to see, do you think we're going to see 7 men strict? Do you think we're going to see an 8th man included in the rotation? And if we do see an 8th man, is it Michael Frazier?
If we see any Michael Frazier minutes in the playoffs, I think everybody is going to riot.
Everyone will explode. Well, what's funny about this, by the way, everyone has been on D'Antoni for so long about not playing young players, and now he finally plays a young player, and it's Michael Frazier.
At the worst possible time. Like, come on. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The timing is awful, and Frazier, with all due respect to Mike Frazier, I hate having to dunk on a guy who's trying to make it in the league, so I don't like to do that. But with respect to his place in the rotation, it's not justified at all. He's not a prospect. He's an undrafted tweener combo guard. He's not shooting well. Like, he doesn't do anything.
I tend to think that it'll be at least 8, because we have seen in the upside, late in the Pacer game, they did use DeMarre, and that was a game they were pseudo trying to win. But we saw in the second half, DeMarre getting increasingly more minutes. There's never been a point in which they have been content with 7 guys. So I don't think that's going to happen here. We've seen Frazier get looks. We've seen Carroll get looks. I don't know who it will be. Certainly, I hope that it's Carroll. I don't think it's going to be Luke. I think it's pretty clear after seeing Luke that he's not really in shape at this point. He just doesn't have the fitness, unless, maybe a few minutes at the 5. But at the 5, I mean, you've got
exactly what I was going to say. He's not in shape to play, but I think you could get away with like 4 or 5 minutes at the 5.
Yeah, at the 5. But then you've got PJ, you've got Jeff, so it's pretty tough to see exactly where he fits in. I just don't see it being 8, because to me, I hope it's Carroll more than Frazier, but they've been pretty insistent to where I don't think you'd see a 7-man like what you saw late in the Warriors series 2 years ago. I think it'll be someone. I hope it's Carroll, because I just have not seen enough from Frazier to offset his obvious lack of seasoning in his youth.
All right, guys, before we wrap things up officially, I need predictions from both of you, and then I'll share my prediction. No justifications for it. Just give me number of games, who's winning the series. Ben, you go first.
Rockets in 6. I've talked myself into it.
Okay. Roosh?
Rockets in 7.
Okay. All right. I want everybody to know that earlier today he was saying Oklahoma City in 7. So we have brought him over to the light side. The optimistic Ben, apparently the middle ground Jackson, have converted the pessimist Roosh to Rockets in 7. I am also Rockets in 6. I made that claim already in yesterday's podcast, or today's podcast, whatever. This is weird. Recording this for ahead of time is strange. Anyways, podcasting, right? So Rockets in 6. I'm going with that. Now, as per usual, you guys know the drill. Where can we find all your content at? Roosh, go ahead and go first.
Yeah, I'm pretty much exclusively on Twitter these days, at Roosh Williams, ROOSH Williams. I also started, I also podcast on Clutch City Control Room, so check that out. And I also started a podcast recently with Zach Noble on Twitter. I'm sorry, but he's on Twitter. But anyways, it's called The Noble and Roosh Show. So go to Apple, check out The Noble and Roosh Show. We did episode 1 interviewing Nasir Little of the Portland Trailblazers. So,
all right, and Ben?
Yep, Ben DuBose on Twitter. the Rockets Wire on Twitter. That's the handle for Rockets Wire, which is the USA Today site that covers the Rockets. And then rocketswire.usatoday.com. That's the website. We've got several stories a day. We've got regular availabilities that we're on Zoom calls with Mike D'Antoni, the players from Florida. So rocketswire.usatoday.com. We'll have all sorts of updates throughout the playoffs, and hopefully they go on a while, more than just this one series.
Absolutely.
And real quick, man, shout out to everyone who paid attention and watched.
Hey, you're stealing my thunder, guy. I was gonna do the shit. No, go ahead. No, but seriously, for everybody that stopped by, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Hopefully, we'll do some more of these live shows in the future if it's received well. Which, based on the turnout, it looks like it was. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But that being said, thank you to you guys as well, Ben, Roosh, for being here for this very first live podcast. I hope it went well. I hope everybody had a good time, learned something, had some good chats. Now, if you will do me a favor, and if you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy the content, do me a huge favor, hit the subscribe button on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Drop us a review, leave us some stars. It means the world to me. I would sincerely appreciate it. And be sure to check out ClutchCityControlRoom.com, my new Houston Rockets blog, the one that Roosh already plugged a little bit, but be sure to check that out as well. Lots of cool content going on over there. Another Rockets podcast called the Launchpad Podcast, as well as some Cougars content going up. We're 20 contributors strong now, so be sure to check that out. But for this podcast, that's where we're going to wrap things up. So as always, thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.